A trembling teenage girl stands outside a crowded upscale restaurant, clutching a cracked violin case as if it's the last piece of her she still recognizes. Her worn sweater pulled tight against the cold evening breeze, while people brush past her without a second glance. She gathers a breath that shakes more than her small hands, steps forward, and whispers to the closest table, her voice almost breaking, "May I play the violin for food?" A few diners laugh under their breath. Someone lifts a phone to record, expecting a silly moment to share online, and another voice mutters something about attention-seeking kids, but the girl doesn't flinch this time. She slowly lifts the violin to her shoulder, touches the bow to the strings, and the moment that first note leaves the instrument, the noise of the street softens as if the entire world has been caught off guard. Conversations pause, heads turn, and even the person recording lowers their phone slightly, unsure if they should keep filming because it becomes clear within seconds that everything they assumed about this girl, her desperation, her presence here, her request, might be completely wrong, and something much heavier has brought her to this exact spot on this exact night. And as that single trembling note hangs in the air, the narrator asks, "But how did she get here? What pushed her to ask strangers for food? And why was the world about to discover a genius in rags?" Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Lina was 16, but hardship had carved shadows under her eyes that made her look older, wiser, and far more tired than any child should ever be. Growing up in a cramped apartment on the edge of a worn-down neighborhood where sirens and distant arguments replaced lullabies, and where her violin became the only thing that ever felt steady in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. Her mother, a once lively woman now battling a chronic illness that drained her strength day by day, raised her alone and often whispered apologies between coughing fits, telling Lina she wished she could give her more, but music had kept them glued together through every storm. When her mother could still sit by the window, she would close her eyes whenever Lina played and say she could almost feel the world soften around them, as if the sound was holding their fragile life in place. When the illness worsened, life began collapsing in quiet, cruel steps. First came the school withdrawal papers, signed because Lina needed to help at home. Then came the final electricity bill they couldn't pay, leaving their apartment swallowed in darkness. And soon after, her mother's medication costs rose beyond what any small job Lina could find could cover. Neighbors tried to help at first, but everyone on their block struggled in their own way, and by the end of the month Lina stared at an empty pantry, her stomach aching while her mother slept weakly in a room that felt colder every night. She stood over the violin case she had kept since childhood, running a finger over the scratches and dents, knowing she had only one thing left of value, one thing she could trade for a meal, maybe two, and the choice tore at her: let them starve, or stand on a street corner and play for food. Through all the hardship, one strange memory clung to her, something her mother had repeated for years with a tired but certain voice even before the illness took its toll. "Never stop playing, Lina. One day, someone important will hear you." Lina never understood it. They had no relatives with influence, no teachers who followed her career, and no mysterious benefactor in their past. Each time she asked what her mother meant, her mother would smile faintly, almost as if she were keeping a secret too heavy to share, saying only that Lina's music carried something special. On her first day on the streets, Lina placed herself on a busy downtown sidewalk, tightening her grip on the violin as people streamed past without even glancing in her direction, their footsteps blending with distant bus engines and the low hum of lunchtime chatter. She played until her fingers felt stiff, but the sound seemed to vanish into the noise of the city, and in her open case lay only a few scattered coins that looked more like accidents than generosity. A nearby shop owner came out with a bucket and tossed water onto the pavement, the splash landing close enough to wet her shoes, sending a cold reminder that she didn't belong there, while a security guard approached with a dismissive wave telling her to move along as if she were blocking the sunlight. Yet even then, without her knowing, someone had stopped far behind the crowd, watching her closely, someone who would soon change everything. 5 blocks away and years earlier, Lina's story held a layer she rarely spoke about, a part hidden even from neighbors who thought they knew her family's struggles. She hadn't learned the violin alone, but had been taught by her own mother, who once carried a reputation as a rising prodigy in a prestigious conservatory. Her mother had abruptly abandoned that world long before Lina's birth, leaving behind trophies, certificates, and every reminder of her past, by locking them away or destroying them entirely, as if erasing a life she no longer claimed. Lina had sometimes caught glimpses of old letters before her mother tucked them out of sight, letters with official seals and foreign addresses, but any question Lina asked was brushed aside with a gentle smile that didn't match the sadness behind her eyes. And as Lina played under flickering candles in their dim apartment, she often wondered what secret her mother guarded so tightly and why it seemed connected to her music. Hours later, after gathering the courage to leave the familiar rough edges of her neighborhood, Lina walked toward the wealthiest part of the city, hoping that people who had more might be willing to spare even a little. But the moment she crossed the invisible line between struggling locals and polished storefronts, she sensed the stares. A group of well-dressed teens spotted her violin and immediately burst into snickers, one of them mocking her stance by pretending to play exaggerated, screeching notes that made the others double over with laughter, while another lifted a phone to record her shame. Lina's throat tightened, and her palms grew sweaty as she tried to decide whether to run or stay, knowing she had nothing to return home with if she left now. After a long, trembling pause, she forced herself to breathe and stepped forward, whispering the line that would echo later across the internet. "May I play for food?" And what none of them expected was what would unfold the moment she played that first trembling note. Her bow hovered for a moment, trembling in her grasp, as every mocking sound around her faded into a dull background blur, and when it finally fell across the strings, the first note left the violin with a clarity that seemed almost impossible given the cracked instrument in her hands. Conversations at nearby tables stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused inches from plates, and even the restaurant staff stepped outside, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain. A small child standing near his mother began to cry softly, not out of fear, but from a strange swell of emotion he didn't have words for, while a businessman walking past dropped his phone without noticing it hit the ground. A couple who had been arguing turned together toward Lina, as though the music had taken hold of their thoughts, and for a moment the entire street felt connected by the invisible thread of her melody. It wasn't the sound of a street musician hoping for spare change. It was the sound of someone who could fill a concert hall, someone whose talent demanded stillness from anyone within earshot. The teen who had been recording her with a grin on his face slowly lowered the phone as the expression shifted to confusion, then awe, and then something like guilt as he realized he had captured something far different than the joke he intended to share. He clipped the video and uploaded it with shaking hands, typing a title he didn't quite understand the weight of. "Homeless Girl Plays Impossible Violin Piece." Within minutes, notifications lit up his screen, comments poured in, and people online began asking who she was, how she knew the piece, and where she had learned to play with such raw emotion. The video spread faster than he expected, reaching people far beyond the street where she stood, and though Lina had no idea any of this was happening, the world had already begun searching for her. Just as Lina finished the last trembling note, a woman stepped out from the entrance of the restaurant, her posture straight and elegant, her presence immediately setting her apart from the diners around her. She looked to be in her mid-50s, with an air of confidence that suggested she was used to being listened to, yet at that moment she seemed frozen, as if she had seen a ghost. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on Lina's hands, then on her face, and in a quiet voice that barely reached above the stunned silence around them, she whispered, "That melody. Who taught you that?" Lina lowered her violin, suddenly unsure whether she'd done something wrong, and answered softly, "My mom." The woman's face turned pale, her breath catching in a way that made anyone nearby sense that this moment meant far more to her than she was letting on, because she recognized the melody, every rise, every pause, every aching turn of it, and she also knew the woman who wrote it.